Hello, world. Thank you for tuning in. I'd like to welcome listeners from around the globe to this evening's program of Going Global with David Delgado, coming to you live on voiceitradio.com, broadcasting from studios in Midtown Cleveland, Ohio. This program generally airs Mondays from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. However, we're hosting a special program today, and we are instead broadcasting live this morning. We will be rebroadcasting a recorded version of this program on Monday night in our usually scheduled time slot. You will also be able to view this program on YouTube under the name Going Global with David Delgado, as well as voiceitradio.com's Facebook page. Coming to you live. 2 weeks ago, we launched the first of a series of programs to examine the current crisis between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. We had as our guest Dr. Tom Fedizin, Professor Emeritus of National Security Affairs and Chairman Europe-Russia Studies Group, U.S. Naval War College. Last week, we had Bob McConnell of the Washington-based U.S.-Ukraine Foundation and former presidential appointee to the Justice Department. Tonight, in a continuation of the series, we have as our guest Dr. Andrey-Kortunov, Director General of the Moscow-based Russia International Affairs Council, and also that's the Russian International Affairs Council, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russian Federation. The topic is the political and humanitarian crisis between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. Could it have been prevented? And is there a peaceful solution? Part 3. Now, let me set the stage for tonight's discussion. On January 12th, and let's back up a little bit. On January 12th, 1987, during a visit to West Berlin, then U.S. President Ronald Reagan gave a speech in which he exhorted then Premier of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall, which had been in place since 1961. President Reagan stated in part, and I quote, "We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace," unquote. General Secretary Gorbachev, to continue to quote President Reagan, he said, "General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down," unquote. The wall did come down on November 9th, 1989, amidst Mr. Gorbachev's environment of glasnost and perestroika. And on December 25th, 1991, the Soviet hammer and sickle flag lowered over the Kremlin for the last time as representatives from 11 Soviet republics in an earlier meeting met in Kazakhstan, announcing that they would no longer be part of the Soviet Union. Instead, they declared they would establish a Commonwealth of independent states, joining the 3 Baltic republics who had already declared their independence from the USSR, leaving Georgia as the sole remaining republic. Well, following these developments, there was great hope that the Cold War was finally over, that Détente could succeed, and the West could, in fact, peacefully and productively coexist with a newly independent Russia, as well as with a Commonwealth of independent states. Allegedly, there were informal assurances given by the Reagan administration, as well as subsequent U.S. administrations, again, allegedly, that NATO would not seek to expand its membership to include the former Soviet republics or encroach upon Russian territory with NATO membership. At one point, there was even further discussion that Russia might be included in NATO membership, and Russian President Putin seemed warm to the idea of improved relations with the U.S. following meetings with then President George W. Bush. Russia did not join NATO, but did join the NATO Partnership for Peace program in 1984 and the Russia-NATO Council in 2002. Former Soviet bloc countries petitioned NATO for membership, and NATO, in fact, allowed many to join to the exclusion of Russia, thus encroaching in what Russia perceived on its territory with offensive and strategic capacity. Well, in addition, the European Union welcomed many of the former republics. Russia itself underwent a leadership change, transitioning from the forward policies of Gorbachev to those of Yeltsin and to the more centrally controlled and, some would argue, corrupt policies of Vladimir Putin, with Dmitry Medvedev as but a footnote therein. Putin himself publicly indicated that Russia would not be intimidated by the West, would not tolerate encroachment on its territory, either economically, politically, or militarily, and embarked on policies of enhancing both its offensive and defensive capabilities, including broad destabilization efforts. February 2014, Russia invaded and seized the Crimea region of Ukraine, as we all know, and subsequently annexed it into Russia. As we all know, Russia once again invaded Ukraine this past February 24th, announcing a, quote, special military operation, unquote, again, claiming as a reason to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine and protect Russian Jews living in Ukraine, forgetting the fact that Ukrainian President Zelensky himself is Jewish. There have been thousands of casualties on both sides, Russian, Ukrainian, but also including Ukrainian citizens by the scores of hundreds, including Ukrainian citizens killed as a result of attacks on civilian infrastructure. Well, two, President Putin has threatened nuclear war, saying he would attack any country interfering with Russia with, quote, devastation they have never seen before, including attacking any country seeking to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Well, since the invasion began, Russia's military has faced stiff resistance from the Ukrainian military. Victory was expected in a few short days, but here we are 3 weeks later, and victory has still been denied Russia. Reports have been received that the Russian military is in many instances bogging down. There have been reported shortages of supplies necessary to continue the war. There have also been reports of Russian military deserters, further indicating that the war may not be going according to plan. This, in and of itself, makes this solution considerably more dangerous. As significantly, Putin has become a pariah, certainly within the international community, as Russian citizens begin to feel the sting of international sanctions. And just yesterday, President Putin, in a speech, indicated that traitors to the Russian cause would be dealt with harshly. Well, some very real questions remain. Questions such as, why did Putin launch this invasion? Is it because he felt the West, and specifically the US and NATO, lied to Russia when it was implied that NATO would not encroach on Russian territory? If that's the case, why did former Soviet bloc countries petition NATO and the EU for membership and continue to do so to this day? Is it the Russian military that they fear? Is it Putin that they fear? What is Putin's endgame in Ukraine with its citizens? And has Putin become a war criminal by attacking and killing innocent civilians, as some have postured? Well, there are many, many more questions that remain, but we're going to be discussing these and other issues with our guest, and let's turn to him now. Dr. Kortunov is president of the new Eurasia Foundation, as well as director general of the Russian International Affairs Council, a nonprofit political and diplomatic think tank established in Moscow by order of the president in 2010. Founders include the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Education and Science, Russian Academy of Science. But having said this, and I want to stress this, this is a nonprofit political and diplomatic think tank and not a part of the government. It's important to stress that. It is a nonprofit political and diplomatic think tank. Prior to assuming these positions, Dr. Kortunov taught Russian foreign policy at the University of Miami here in the United States and at the Lewis and Clark College in Portland, University of California. He was also deputy director of the Institute of U.S. and Canadian Studies and is the founder and first president of the Moscow Public Science Foundation. Dr. Kortunov graduated from the Moscow State the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, that's the MGIMO, with postgraduate studies at the Institute for U.S. and Canadian Studies, USSR Academy of Sciences, and holds a PhD in history. His academic focus is on international relations, foreign diplomacy of Russian and Russian-American relations. He's the author of over 120 publications dedicated to the analysis of Soviet-Russian-American relations, global security, and the foreign, I should say, and domestic policy of the USSR and Russia. Dr. Kortunov has been a guest on this particular program in the past. We welcome him once again. Dr. Kortunov, welcome to the program Going Global with David Delgado.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction. I'm not sure that I deserve it, but it's nice to be back, though under a very challenging set of circumstances. Of course, I would prefer to discuss something very different from what we are going to discuss today. I would like to discuss a new reset between Russia and the United States, where issues of common European security architecture, but here we are. And let me start with the following. You, in the beginning of your introduction, you referred to the Berlin Wall. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I have to tell you that I was here in Berlin on November 9th, 1989. And I was even privileged to participate physically in the demolition of the wall. We had a small workshop. Young scholars from various parts of Europe got together to discuss the future of European security. And we got the news that something is happening close to the wall. So we decided to arm ourselves with hammers, and we marched to Checkpoint Charlie. And indeed, there were many people there on both sides of the wall with various instruments trying to make a hole in the wall. It turned out to be quite difficult because the wall was pretty robust. It was fortified concrete. And we were struggling with the wall. I do recall that someone brought a tape recorder, and it was Pink Floyd. We don't need your education. If you remember, this famous song from the movie Wall. And that inspired us. And after some efforts, we were able to make this hole, and we could see people on the other side of the wall. It was a very touchy moment for all of us. And there were no divisions between Russians, Germans, Americans, Hungarians, Bulgarians, whoever participated in this happening. And at that point, it seemed that the future was really bright for all of us. Sky was the limit. We hoped that from now on, the most difficult part of the European history was already behind us, and we would go for more and more cooperation, more and more unity. And something indeed for some time seemed to reflect our ideas. We were very naive. I think we were very young. We were very romantic. But it is very hard right now to figure out at what particular moment something went wrong. I think that it was not a particular juncture. It was not a particular tipping point in the European history, but it was a gradual development which we were not ready to address and to confront. I think that both sides committed many mistakes and blunders already in 1990s. I would say that the Russian Federation probably demonstrated a lot of ignorance about how this new European house should function. On the other hand, the West arguably demonstrated a lot of arrogance trying to engage Russia by a geographical extension of its traditional institutions that served the West so well during the Cold War. So in my view, we tried at least three models of getting Russia into Europe without giving the Kremlin a veto power on major decisions related to European security. The first model was reflected in the Charter of Paris. It's 1990. And the intention was to create new pan-European institutions that would be inclusive rather than exclusive. And of course, OSCE, the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, was supposed to be the core of this system. It didn't work out because the West was concerned about institutional competition with NATO and the European Union, while Russia was not ready to invest enough political capital into OSCE. Then there were attempts to do something about special status for Russia within West-centered institutions in Europe, like the NATO-Russia Council or the so-called four spaces in cooperation between Russia and the European Union. That didn't work out either, unfortunately, because I think that there were very different perceptions of what these interfaces should mean for each of the sides. I think that Russia expected these institutions to be real decision makers on European matters, while the West considered these institutions to be more of information centers that might sweeten the appeal of the NATO and EU enlargement for politicians in the Kremlin. And finally, there was an attempt to build this new European architecture on the basis of two pillars. In the West, that should be the European Union. In the East, the so-called Eurasian Economic Union, which Moscow was trying to put together for a long time. In the security domain, it was NATO and this collective security treaty organization that Moscow introduced together with a number of post-Soviet states. It didn't work either. So here we are. And of course, 2014, the Ukrainian crisis was the climax of this inability to come up with a coordinated, consorted project for the Euro-Atlantic security system. From 2014 on, we saw more and more tensions emerging between Russia and the West, and these tensions resulted in this tragic development that we now watch for the last 3 weeks. I have to tell you that I was completely unprepared to see that happen, and I always thought that a military conflict between Russia and Ukraine was inconceivable, and none of my friends in the academic community was ready to see it. So it was a major shock for all of us. We turned out to be wrong. And I think many of us are still quite devastated to see what's going on.
You know, I have to say that that major shock that you just described has been echoed by academic friends and contacts that I have talked to as well. A guest we had on the program a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Tom Fedizin, he's a professor emeritus at the U.S. Naval War College and a former NATO strategist, and he indicated that he would not have forecasted an invasion even as military troops were building up. And he was telling his students, because he is teaching a class specifically on Putin himself, he is teaching a class that since it was announced, literally filled up almost overnight to where they're beyond capacity. But he said, I would never have imagined that this would have happened. Therein lies the problem, because no one would imagine this would happen. What's the next step? No one's going to imagine the next step and the next step and the next step. Therein lies the particular problem. Let me digress back to the Berlin Wall for just a minute. You mentioned you were there. You saw that. That would have been an interesting point in history to certainly witness. But past guests, again, that I've talked to and fellow academics that I've talked to in the past have indicated that Putin was present in East Berlin when the wall was collapsing, and he literally was calling back to Moscow to ask for direction, for instructions, and none came. What they felt and feel is that affected his psyche, that here he is, KGB major, KGB colonel, and he's watching the collapse of a Russian institution in East Berlin, and he's powerless to do it. And that had to have affected his psyche, as they have indicated, because he was powerless. He was getting no direction from Moscow at all. What are your thoughts on that affected his psyche?
Well, I would agree that definitely had a major formative experience for Vladimir Putin. It was a formative experience for me as well, but I was on the other side. I was in West Berlin, so probably that is the difference between the two of us. But I think that what happened in the 1990s left a very deep imprint, not just on President Putin, but on a much larger group of politicians and statesmen who now run the country. I think that for them, this threat of something chaotic, something that they cannot control and they can have no influence on, is arguably the worst nightmare they can imagine. That's why Putin, though he made his career in 1990s, he became deputy to a very liberal mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. Probably without the Soviet disintegration, Vladimir Putin would have never reached the position that he has right now. But anyway, I think that for these people, the whole idea that we might somehow slide back to 1990s, that chaos might become once again the name of the game is something absolutely unbearable. And if you follow the rhetoric of Vladimir Putin, if you ask him what is the major borderline in the global politics, is it really the borderline between authoritarianism and democracy? He would say, no, that's not the real problem. The real problem is the borderline between order and chaos. And chaos is evil. Order is good, even imperfect order, even order which has many flaws, maybe authoritarian order. That's why for him, and I think for people like him, it is very difficult to confess that there are certain things that we cannot control, and we should not even try to control. I think this is a major limitation of this generation, and I agree with you that we should look into the beginning of 1990s to see the roots of this particular perception. Which guides many practical decisions, not only in terms of Ukraine, but look at Syria. For instance, why did Putin support Bashar Assad there? Why does he support authoritarian state leaders in other regions like Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela? I think it is the result of this very deep trauma which people like him experienced some 30 years ago.
We're going to be taking a short break, but I do want to ask you this particular question before we go on break. There are many points that you have brought up that are very, very interesting points to certainly explore. He launches an invasion into Ukraine. Again, to denazify, ostensibly to denazify and to protect Jews against violence. So the question is, in your opinion, why did Putin launch the invasion on the 24th? And then we're going to be taking a short break to come back and explore that further.
Well, one of possible explanations is that the 23rd of February is a public holiday in Russia. It's the so-called Defenders' Day. And probably this military operation was postponed till after the holiday. But as you know, troops were mounted there along the border with Ukraine for a long period of time. He couldn't have kept them for too long, and it was use it or lose it. So I think that now, of course, it is easier to say once it has already happened, but I think that there was a certain military logic in the particular timing of this operation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to be taking a break on that particular note. You're listening to Going Global with David Delgado, and we have on the air with us tonight Director General Dr. Andrey-Kortunov of the Moscow-based Russian International Affairs Council. Tonight's program is brought to you by the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County, and Margaret Wong and Associates, Cleveland-based award-winning immigration attorneys. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hello, this is Larry H. Gardner, host of Headlines and Headaches on VoiceItRadio.com. Fentanyl is the leading cause of drug overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. It is now found in powdered cocaine, crack cocaine, meth, and heroin. Any drug may contain fentanyl. If you use drugs, never use alone, and carry Narcan in case of overdose. Call the Adams Board 24-hour addiction line and mental health crisis hotline at area code 216-623-6888. That's 216-623-6888 if you are ready for help.
Margaret W. Wong is a leading immigration lawyer in Cleveland, Ohio, and 8 other cities. Practicing immigration law for more than 45 years, Margaret W. Wong is recognized by U.S. News Best Law Firms, Super Lawyers, and is rated AV Preeminent. Margaret W. Wong consults with you at her office or on the phone. For all your immigration needs, email info@imwong.com. That's info@imwong.com, or call 216-566-9908. That's 216-566-9908. 9908.
This is Chanel McLeod, and I'm always tuned in to Voice It Radio.
This is Al Porter Jr., the president of Black on Black Crime Incorporated. Fentanyl is the leading cause of drug overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. It is now found in powdered cocaine, crack cocaine, meth, and heroin. Any drug may contain fentanyl. If you use drugs, never use alone and carry Narcan in case of overdose. Call the Adams Board 24-hour addiction and mental health crisis hotline at 216-623-6888. If you're ready for help, that's 216-623-6888. Share this message and save lives. This message brought to you by the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County.
We are Voice It Radio, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on voiceitradio.com.
Hi, I'm Lillian Piles.
And I'm Harry Boomer.
Join us every Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be covering all aspects of theater, film, and the performing arts right here from Northeast Ohio.
We will also tell you about what national major productions are coming to town. Don't miss Backstage with Lillian Piles and Harry Boomer every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. right here on voiceitradio.com.
Hey, this is Eric Dean Seaton, television director and creator of the graphic novel series Legend of the Mantamaji. Whether I'm in Cleveland or Cali or on Raven's Home or Life in Pieces, I'm always tuned into voiceitradio.com.
What's going on? This is your brother Bashir Jones, and you are tuned in to voiceitradio.com.
Join yours truly, Harvey Zay, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. We will talk jazz, have interviews with special guests, and spin some of the greatest jazz tunes from past and present. It's Harvey Zay's Jazz Room from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on voiceitradio.com.
We are Voice It Radio, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on voiceitradio.com.
Welcome back to Going Global with David Delgado. We're talking with Dr. Andrey-Kortunov. He's the Director General of the Moscow-based nonprofit organization, Russian International Affairs Council. You too can join the conversation with questions by viewing Voice It Radio's Facebook page and tuning into this broadcast live or calling 1-216-772-0500, 1-216-772-0500, or email your questions to Going Global, let me correct that, globalagestrategies@gmail.com. That's globalagestrategies@gmail.com. Andre, when we took a break, we were talking about Putin launching the invasion. At the end of the day, why did he invade Ukraine?
Well, my take is that since the stakes are very high, arguably they concluded in the Kremlin that the existence of Ukraine in its current political shape, with extended ties to NATO, with options of joining NATO at some point, constitutes not just a security challenge for Russia, but arguably a threat to the mere existence of Russia in its current form. Because, of course, anyone who would do a cost-benefit analysis would conclude that the costs of such action in Ukraine would be extremely high. Economically, politically, militarily, psychologically, there are many very high risks involved here. And it's not quite clear what benefits are. And this is exactly why most of scholars I spoke to, most of analysts I interacted with, suggested that the concentration of forces along the border with Ukraine was supposed to deter potential Ukrainian action in Donbass, or to send a signal to the West that Russia deserves more attention that it was getting from the United States or from the NATO alliance. That's why we were caught unprepared. But still, you know, for me, it's a kind of mystery because this logic is not easy to comprehend. And we now see that the price of the decision is mounting, and we don't even know how this whole thing ends. So I would be too ambitious to argue that I know the answer to the question that you have just raised.
Well, but those are good insights into the mindset of this particular administration there in Russia. You also answered a follow-up question that I was going to make in terms of Russia surrounding itself or not wanting to surround itself with possible NATO membership countries. But that does beg the question of this, why former Soviet bloc countries have petitioned NATO and the EU for membership. Is it a concern out of concern of this kind of invasion? Russia thus far has not invaded NATO countries. I believe they do know that if they do invade NATO countries, it's going to take this conflict to an entirely different level. By invading Ukraine, which is not a member of NATO, there has been a little bit of a hands-off policy by NATO countries. But isn't this further validation that countries that were part of the former Soviet bloc should in fact become members of NATO? The other side of that argument, though, is rather than joining NATO, could a mutually agreed upon security treaty be crafted such that these countries will not petition NATO membership, yet they'll be guaranteed security that Russia will not invade? Something similar could have in fact been done with Ukraine or any other of these countries. But at the end of the day, these countries have petitioned NATO for membership for very specific reasons that they feel threatened by Russia. Again, could not Russia have given assurances that that would not be the case, that they should feel secure? Russia is not going to seek to advance militarily against any of these countries, provided, again, these countries don't join NATO. And I guess that's the question.
Well, my take is that one of the problems we face here is that NATO is the only game in town in terms of European security. It's the only institution which can assure your security if you are located in Europe. It is the only institution which can make decisions on the security matters. So that implies that if you are out of NATO, you are out of Europe. And I think it's a major incentive for all the countries in the East or in the Balkans to join NATO. It's also, I think, an issue of relationship between NATO and the European Union. Many in post-Soviet countries and in post-Yugoslavia countries believe that you cannot really get to the European Union unless you enter NATO. And historically, this is right. Indeed, all the countries that joined the European Union after the Soviet disintegration, after the disintegration of Yugoslavia, they started with NATO. So in this race, if you wish to become a European, membership to the European Union might be considered as gold medal, but a membership to NATO is a silver medal. And of course, we should blame Russia for not being sensitive to security concerns of its neighbors. I think this is something that cannot be denied. Indeed, Russia should have worked harder in order to reassure these countries that some other alternative models of security are not beyond their reach. And right now, as you probably know, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that in the end of the day, Ukraine can drop its pitch to join NATO if there are other plausible ways to assure its security. He says that our Ukrainians are ready to go for a neutral status, but we need some very robust, legally binding guarantees for such a status provided by major countries around, including the United States and the United Kingdom, maybe Turkey, maybe some other countries. So I think that what we should do, if we are thinking about European security in future, we should make sure that these larger pan-European institutions and regimes are becoming more efficient than they are right now, because OSCE is not even an interstate organization. Its legal status is very unclear, and definitely it is too small, and it cannot be regarded as a viable security provider compared to NATO. So it is really a problem of the European security architecture that has to be addressed. If it is not addressed, then the only way to go would be to expand NATO further, because the demand side will be there. There'll be a natural inclination of these countries to get out of the gray zone, not to be countries in between, but rather to be countries which are firmly anchored to the Western security institution like NATO. Having said that, let me also argue that I see that some of the leaders in countries between Russia and NATO demonstrate, I think, a very appropriate prudence not to push on this issue too hard. For example, you take Moldova. The new leadership of Moldova, Maya Sandu, very able president of this country, does not hide her intention to get closer to the European Union, to join the European Union at some point, to preserve liberal democracy, to go ahead with reforms, with the fighting corruption and fighting oligarchs. But at the same time, she is very cautious not to irritate the Kremlin by arguing that Moldova would like to join NATO. She sticks to the neutral status of the country, and I think that's the right policy for the time being.
Andrei, and I wouldn't disagree with you there at all. I read the publication of the Russian International Affairs Council, Postulates on Russian Foreign Policy 2012 through 2018. And in it, part of what was indicated was that Russia would not tolerate being surrounded and I'm paraphrasing at this point, but Russia would not tolerate being surrounded by countries that are not favorable to it, meaning NATO countries. And I can, in fact, go to the specific clause, but this is what I'm paraphrasing at the moment. And my question to you is, who didn't read this document? This clearly indicates that that Russia's not going to tolerate this, and yet it continued to happen. Now, you just postured the same thing that I've been posturing for some time now. Why can't we reach a security guarantee, like the case of Moldova, with all these countries that are petitioning and have been petitioning membership into NATO? Why can't we negotiate a security treaty that would respect their security, their sovereignty, Russia's security, Russian sovereignty going forward? What happened? Who didn't read this document? And if they did, was it taken seriously or not? Obviously not.
No, it's a good question. And when I look back into what we wrote 10 years ago already, I think that we would be better off if these postulates have been followed by the Russian leadership, but also by our partners in the West. I think that we had a kind of mixture here. On the one hand, as I said earlier, in my view, Russia didn't do a great job in trying to convince its neighbors that there are indeed some alternative ways to provide for their security. And of course, what happened in the South Caucasus in 2008 and later in Ukraine in 2014 was not very reassuring for them. On the other hand, I think that the West has not demonstrated enough flexibility. Their point was that NATO is an open organization. This is a part of the North Atlantic Treaty of 1949, and we are not going to change it just to please President Putin. So basically, it's an open door policy which cannot be reconsidered. Again, I think that if there was political will on both sides and a little bit of empathy on both sides, probably we wouldn't have the crisis that we go through right now. But now it would be even more difficult to reassure countries in between that they do not necessarily need to seek membership to the NATO alliance. and they can look for alternative ways to ensure their security.
Well, I would agree with you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Still, I think that there are some specific issues that we can address even now, and that relates to confidence-building measures. We need to restore the Russian-NATO dialogue. It's not a concession to Mr. Putin. I think both sides need this dialogue. We can probably think about confidence-building measures in the Baltic and especially in the Black Sea areas. I think, again, this is not a concession. This is something that will benefit both sides. We can even talk about US-Russian moratorium on the deployment of the new generation of nuclear mid-range missiles in Europe, so we can de facto get back to the agreement on nuclear missiles, which the Trump administration worked out, I think, in 2018 or 19. So there are certain issues that can be addressed, but the most urgent thing is, of course, to stop the conflict in Ukraine, to make sure that people are not being killed there, and to agree on some kind of at least interim settlement, which would diffuse this crisis. If we're able to handle this issue, then we can move ahead to more complicated political issues related to the European security architecture.
I would agree with what you're saying. And let me just be clear that I in no way, and I know you as well, I'm sure, in no way condone this invasion at all. I do not condone the invasion of a sovereign country by another country seeking to impose its own will. I do support dialogue. I do support mutually agreed upon security treaties to where neither country, neither region feels the necessity to join a security bloc such as what NATO is. Having said that, again, Russia clearly articulated its policies, as you indicated in your publication, postulates Russian foreign policy 2012 through 2018. I understand it's since been updated. To me, that should have been taken quite seriously and certainly would have been a negotiating approach with Russia, and perhaps we could have just headed off this invasion. Fact of the matter, it has occurred. Civilians, innocent civilians are being targeted. Innocent civilians have been killed, as well as casualties on both sides. Yes, the idea is to stop this. We're going to be taking a short break. When we come back, Andrei, I'd like to talk about what is going on the ground. We've also had a number of different questions that have been emailed in. I do want to get to those questions very quickly. We're going to be taking a short 2-minute break. You too can join the program by emailing your questions to Going Global at voice at should I say Going Global Voice at gmail.com or Global Aid Strategies at gmail.com. This program is brought to you by Margaret Wong and Associates, Cleveland-based award-winning immigration attorney. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this very short break.
This is Chanel McLeod, and I'm always tuned in to Voice It Radio.
Margaret W. Wong is a leading immigration lawyer in Cleveland, Ohio, and 8 other cities. Practicing immigration law for more than 45 years, Margaret W. Wong is recognized by U.S. News Best Law Firms, Super Lawyers, and is rated AV Preeminent. Margaret W. Wong consults with you at her office or on the phone. For all your immigration needs, email info@imwong.com. That's info@imwong.com, or call 216-566-9908. That's 216-566-9908.
Hello, this is Larry H. Gardner, host of Headlines and Headaches on VoiceItRadio.com. Fentanyl is the leading cause of drug overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. It is now found in powdered cocaine, crack cocaine, meth, and heroin. Any drug may contain fentanyl. If you use drugs, never use alone, and carry Narcan in case of overdose. Call the Adams Board 24-hour addiction line and mental health crisis hotline at area code 216-623-6888. That's 216-623-6888 if you are ready for help.
This is Chanel McLeod, and I'm always tuned in to Voice It Radio.
This is Al Porter Jr., the president of Black on Black Crime Incorporated. Fentanyl is the leading cause of drug overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. It is now found in powdered cocaine, crack cocaine, meth, and heroin. Any drug may contain fentanyl. If you use drugs, never use alone and carry Narcan in case of overdose. Call the Adams Board 24-hour addiction and mental health crisis hotline at 216-623-6888 if you're ready for help. That's 216-623-6888. Share this message and save lives. This message brought to you by the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County.
Welcome back to Going Global with David Delgado. We're talking to Dr. Andrey-Kortunov, the Director General of the Moscow-based Russia International Affairs Council. Andrey, we've got a number of different questions that have been emailed in. I do want to get to the questions and then touch base to a great degree on what's going on the ground in Russia and Russian perception. Here's one of the questions. We understand that some internet providers have pulled out of Russia. What is the status of the internet in Russia now? You are coming to us via Zoom, but what is the status of the internet in Russia at the moment?
Well, they closed, I hope temporarily, but they shut down a couple of international social networks. You cannot get on Facebook right now. You cannot get Twitter. And there are rumors that probably they will go after YouTube because allegedly YouTube has some censorship over the information released by Russian official channels. So we operate on Telegram, on Signal, and Zoom is still in operation. Skype is still in operation, but we don't know what will happen next.
Well, it's unfortunate that they do shut down Zoom because, or should I say YouTube, because this particular program also will be appearing on YouTube after we finish it. You'll be able to query Going Global with David Delgado on YouTube, and you'll be able to see yourself. And I'm glad to see you on Zoom right now. We have, like I said, met many times on this program. This is the first time we've seen each other face to face. Here's another part of the of a question. What risks are you taking by participating in this program, given that some internet has been shut down already, given that Putin indicated yesterday that Russian traders would be dealt with harshly? What risk are you taking participating in this program?
Well, the frank answer is that I do not know, and probably no one knows right now, what will happen within the next couple of days and weeks. Indeed, there were new pieces of legislation and that new pieces of legislation give us new definition of what high treason might mean under the current circumstances. I hope that the risks are not too high, but the reality is that we don't know. It's a moving target, and we see how it evolves. There are a couple of court procedures against dissidents. A number of liberal media were put out of circulation, like, for instance, very popular Echo of Moscow radio station, and Dozht means rain TV channel. So definitely we see that there are more restrictions than we experienced 3 weeks ago, and this is something that we should keep in mind.
Very good. And another question that has been emailed in: what media do Russians have access to other than state-sponsored messages? And I noted that Russian International Affairs Council was partly founded also by Interfax. But what state media, what media other than state-sponsored messages do normal citizens have access to? You mentioned
Well,
Skype and Zoom, obviously, but what do they have?
You know, I think that the Russian population can be roughly divided into two parts. The first part relies primarily on what it gets from TV. And these are mostly state-controlled channels. Right now, they follow the official narrative in describing the conflict and the international reaction to the conflict and the situation in Russia itself. The second part of the population, maybe it is slightly smaller than the first one, maybe 40%, maybe 45%. I don't know exactly how large it is, but these are people who get most of their information through internet. They do not watch TV, they do not care about these official channels, and they are usually subscribed to bloggers. They subscribed to various Telegram channels or other sources that they receive through internet. So there is a balance between the two groups. And of course, right now, the divisions between the two groups are growing larger. Though, of course, we should not also forget that in Russia, like I think in any other country under similar circumstances, we have the rally around the flag phenomenon. So those people who support Putin are more articulate in demonstrating their support. The question is how stable this support is.
Very good. And just one more question. There have been many emailed in, but I don't have time for all of them. One more question, and really there's a secondary question to that. The emailed question is Putin trying to drag the U.S. into a war? Now, this is something that, again, some of my academics have said that possibly this is a ploy, and it's also come out on the internet that it is a ploy for Putin to try to get the U.S. into a bigger war. Is that the case in your opinion?
Well, I can only guess, but my brief answer would be probably not, because Putin and anyone in Russia would understand that NATO is much stronger than the Russian Federation. If NATO is engaged in this confrontation, there is no way Russia can win. The only threat, or only deterrent that Russia can use is the threat of vertical escalation, which implies that if NATO is to intervene, Russia might be forced to use tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. I think that basically there is a kind of general understanding between Russia and NATO that NATO will not get involved directly. It will render military assistance to Ukraine, but it will not try, for instance, to introduce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. It will not try to use its airfields to serve Ukrainian aircraft. There is still, I think, a gray area between military assistance and a direct engagement. And for me, the danger is that the two sides might have different interpretations of what this gray area means. Russia might have a broad interpretation that NATO should not, for instance, I don't know, share intelligence with Ukrainians, or shouldn't do something that it would interpret as a direct military engagement. And NATO might have a different interpretation of what constitutes a direct involvement. So this is the risk which, in my opinion, should be managed. And it's good that the Pentagon has approached the Russian General Staff trying to establish more direct lines of communication. I hope that the risks of escalation are still not very high, though I might be wrong on that as well.
You and I have talked in the past about the fact that now there's nobody talking to one another between Russia and the United States behind the scenes. We've talked that in the past there were many in track 1 and track 2 negotiations discussing the situations behind the scenes, but right now there doesn't seem to be anybody, and therein is certainly a danger. I do have some faith that perhaps this can be resolved by virtue of what Zelensky has advanced in the last couple of days, and that is the possibility of a negotiated peace or settlement if Ukraine agrees not to pursue NATO membership, to the extent that it is not threatened and Russian troops pull back. Again, mutually secured assurances of security rather than destruction. Now, here's a question. We're starting to draw close to our closing time or end time, so we've got to get along very quickly. But what is the situation on the ground with citizens in Ukraine, everyday Russian citizens? What's the situation there? Their perception of the war? Are they against it? Are they for it? We see protests that are going on. Also, we saw just yesterday a rally, pro-war rally. So, what is the situation on the ground, in your opinion?
Well, of course, there are protests. Of course, the political opposition is trying to get more active. Right now, protests are relatively small. They happen in large metropolitan areas like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, and these are not huge rallies. Of course, we still have COVID restrictions, so you cannot legally get out to the streets of Moscow and demonstrate without breaking the law. So that creates another obstacle on the way of more street activities. But definitely these protests will continue. We saw many intellectuals who openly criticized the decision of the Kremlin and asked for an immediate ceasefire. There were many people in various professional groups who also raised their voices against this military operation. So far, I think that these protests do not constitute a real challenge to the government, but a lot here will depend on how long the operation will last for, what are the casualties on the Russian side, what damage is inflicted upon the civilian population, and how the war is covered in the Russian media.
Very good. Thank you very much. And one final question that does come to mind when you see Putin in briefings that in news clips that have been released, you see him separated from his advisors by a great distance of in terms of meters, maybe 3-4 meters. His advisors are sitting at one end and Putin is sitting at the other end. Where are his advisors, in your opinion, on all of this? Are they united behind Putin, or are they divided? And are they concerned that if they express any kind of dissenting opinion, that they may be subject to harsh and severe retribution?
Well, I can guess that those in the Russian leadership who are in charge of the economic bloc of the government should be really concerned about the current situation, because it goes far beyond anything that we have experienced so far in terms of sanctions. These are very, very serious sanctions, and they will be very detrimental to the Russian economy, especially if you take a midterm and long-term future. But my personal take is that if there is anyone who can influence the position of the Russian president, this someone should come from the outside rather than from inside. Maybe one of international partners of President Putin, someone whom President respects and feels confident about, someone who can demonstrate understanding and empathy. Someone, I don't know, maybe Angela Merkel, maybe Chairman Xi, maybe Prime Minister Modi, but someone of this caliber, not someone within the group of advisors or assistants.
Lastly, in your opinion, do you think we're on the precipice of a nuclear exchange?
I hope not, but right now, unfortunately, I cannot rule it out completely. I think the chances are still low, but the chances are getting higher.
Andrei, on that note, we're going to have to say thank you so much for appearing on this program. I do want to keep you on the short list of having you back on the program as this crisis continues. Let us hope that it does not result in a nuclear exchange. Let's hope that cooler heads prevail. Let's hope that perhaps this discussion will encourage leaders on both sides, and certainly not this discussion. And I don't mean to infer that this is the all omnipotent program on this, because there are many, but let's hope that Western leaders and Russian leaders begin to realize that yes, we can reach a negotiated solution, stop the hostilities immediately, and assure security for all parties concerned. After all, I don't believe any party wants to really take over another party, resulting in casualties of hundreds of thousands and perhaps even millions or billions of citizens. I'm going to be closing, and as I've said many times in the past, the listening public needs to understand that we are in great danger, not grievous danger, but great danger. And I want to quote retired Air Force General Philip Breedlove, former commander of U.S. European Command and NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, where he said, Russian aggression in the Ukraine is the most serious crisis we have faced in Europe since the end of the Cold War. From the Russian perspective, Russia too is likely thinking that NATO and Western aggression is the most likely serious crisis they have faced since the end of the Cold War. Well, the promise that NATO would not expand, in fact, has expanded in recent years to include many countries of the former Soviet bloc, and which a war in Europe would seriously undermine, if not destroy altogether. And in the United States, we're dealing with a nation weary of war after more than a decade spent in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a public wary of more armed intervention abroad. As I've said before, we need a national debate on what our policy is going to be, and then we need to engage our allies in Europe on what our policy is going to be, both economically and militarily. Also, Russia needs a rethink as well. As some have posited, there is a solution to the crisis in Ukraine, a solution that would require the West to rethink this position of Ukraine and the former Eastern Bloc countries in an entirely different manner. The position would be to reassert sovereignty for all that would fall under neither the Russian sphere of influence nor under NATO, and with mutual security therein, as I've indicated. The West should publicly abandon its plans to westernize Ukraine and instead establish it as a neutral buffer zone between NATO and Russia, similar to Switzerland in World War II and Austria during the Cold War. Economically, the West should help develop an economic rescue plan for Ukraine, jointly funded by the IMF, the EU, Russia, and the United States, given Russia's interest to have a stable and prosperous Ukraine and other former CIS countries on its border. For its part, Russia itself should also reconsider its options and what its policy is going to be toward Ukraine and the West. One of returning to détente, recognizing that neither side would win in a global conflict, or one of continuing escalation that can only end ominously. Some would argue that changing policy toward Russia and Ukraine, and Russia itself changing policy toward Ukraine and the West at this stage of the conflict, would considerably damage one another's credibility globally. There would undoubtedly be certain repercussions, but the repercussions of continuing a strategy, which to this point has served only to escalate matters, would be far greater. In closing, as I've said many times in the past, and I'll say it again today, 2014 was the first anniversary, or the centennial of World War I, 108 years ago. No one thought there would be war, but war did come by the end of July 1914, triggered by events in Eastern Europe. In retrospect, war came as an enormous shock, almost like the sinking of the Titanic. In the end, it shattered Europe, cost tens of millions of lives, bankrupted countries, and changed forever those who survived the horrors. A century later, our focus is again on Eastern Europe, the site of a terrible regional conflict that threatens to entangle the world's leading powers. In the present circumstances, I've said before, as in 1914, miscalculations, missteps, technical difficulties, misunderstandings, and inflated ego by either and all sides may well result in a war which there will be no winners, East or West, only losers, but then regrettably, there won't be anyone left to lament it. I want to thank Dr. Andrey-Kortunov of the Russian International Affairs Council for appearing on today's program. Andrei, I can still see you on Zoom. Thank you once again for appearing on the program, and I look forward to having you on the program once again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Tonight's program has been brought to you by the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County and Margaret Wong and Associates, Cleveland-based award-winning immigration attorneys representing individuals on immigration issues in the United States and others. And so, until next time, be kind and respectful to one another, because after all, we are all we have. This is David Delgado, and we're going global.